they go from those guys to Hartenstein, and then Alex Caruso, who I've said for the past 5 years is the premier point of attack defender in the league. Guess who one of the other main candidates for that title is? His teammate, Lou Dort, who I looked this up. Of the last 10 years, among the best seasons by B-Ball Index's its metric, perimeter isolation defense, the top 7 of the top 25 belong to Dort and Caruso. 7 of the top 25 seasons of the last 10 years belong to two guys who are now on the same team. This is Hot Hand Theory. This is a podcast where we talk about the NBA and break things down from an analytical perspective. I'm your co-host, XJ. As always, he is my brilliant co-host, Geoff. Geoff, we are back for season 2. You made sure to make sure that I said that when we started the podcast. It is season 2. It doesn't have the same
effect if you point out, if you pull out the curtain.
Season 2 of Hot Hand Theory. We got a fun one today. We're gonna answer 7 questions that will absolutely lay out how the 2024-25 NBA season will go. We have access to the NBA script. We cracked the code. We reproduced it really with data and elite analysis, most of the elite analysis on your end, the data on my end. And we're going to let our audience know what's going to happen. There's lots of spoilers ahead. I'm excited. Geoff, how are you feeling?
I'm great, as always. I give you a solid 8 out of 10 for the season 2 pitch. I don't think you should have, That's okay.
I was told that saying season 2 would draw people in because people like TV shows, and then there's like this continuation. We had season 1, now we have season 2, and that'll make our viewers more engaged with Hot Hand Theory. This
is like a whole ethos, you're like there's like a whole mythology behind behind the Hot Hand Theory universe. People love that shit.
I think it's true.
The Marvel-verse, Lostpedia, everybody gets into this stuff. Now there's going to be a Hot Hand Theory verse. They don't even know the spinoffs that are coming. They don't even know, actually, what's about to happen on this channel.
We got a lot. We got a lot in store, honestly.
We do. I'm excited. I'm excited for it. I'm excited for this episode. Let's hop into it. Let's stop bullshitting around.
All right, let's go straight to question number 1. We're going to start sequentially. We're going to start from the offseason. Number 1 question. We have the answer for you. Which team made the most underrated offseason moves? Geoff, I will let you do the honors of starting us off. Which team made the most underrated moves this offseason?
I have a very, very good answer. The right answer, actually.
Okay. Yeah. That's what I think.
It's okay. I think it's OKC. I don't think people properly recognize how good they're about to be if they're healthy. I think that people are already forgetting how good they were last season because of how the season ended. But I dare anyone to go look at that Dallas OKC series and tell me that OKC wasn't the better team. I think it's possible that Dallas had the better player, best player. I think Luka is one of, if not the best players in the entire world. But OKC was a great team last year that ran into the ultimate buzzsaw that happens in playoff series, and that's shooting variance. They got shooting variance into the ground on both ends.
They shot sides,
terrible.
Yep.
They shot terrible, missed everything. Dallas made everything, and still there they were with a lead on the road in Game 6 with like a minute left, ready to send it back home to OKC for Game 7. Not saying they would have won a Game 7, but OKC was the better team, the best team in the West last year, in my opinion, maybe second best behind Denver. That's another thing we'll talk about down the line. Like, Denver was up 20 in the second half of Game 7, ready to play the Western Conference Finals. I think they're kind of being slept on a little bit, but yeah, OKC was really good last season. And then they added Alex Caruso and Isaiah Hartenstein. This is silly. This is a joke. This is everything that High End Theory is about. It's synergy, it's additive impact to the max. These are two guys that, whether they start, whether they come off the bench, they're going to play 25 minutes a night, roughly. And everything they do is going to be to the benefit of the team. That's what they do. They will not step on anyone's toes. Chet Holmgren is not going to be a worse player because Isaiah Hartenstein is on the court with him. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is not going to be a worse player because Alex Caruso is on the court with him. This is pure additive impact. And they did it while getting rid of the biggest negative on their team and one of the biggest negatives in the league. I'm not saying that Josh Giddey can't be good in a different role. In his role, Josh Giddey was a hindrance to this team. They would have been even better in that Dallas series in spite of the shooting variance if the Josh Giddey minutes were just eradicated. They got rid of that and replaced them with two guys, Alex Caruso, who can shoot threes, but two guys who are all-world defenders. This team is going to be off the charts good, and I think that it's being slept on just how good they're going to be.
Yeah, I love the answer. I was generally thinking I'm going to shy away from saying, the Knicks, the Thunder, the Timberwolves, the Sixers, those are the teams that have made the biggest acquisitions this offseason, but I feel like you're probably just still right because despite OKC getting a lot of credit for the acquisitions, for the big changes that they've made in the offseason, it's still somehow underrated. Like, I don't think people are realizing how ridiculously good this team is, how well constructed it is, how they have absolutely no weaknesses anywhere, how they can guard anyone, how they can score on anyone. Like, it is unbelievable, the team that's been constructed. And I think like right after the Hartenstein acquisition from the Thunder, we had talked about it. And I think we both said, or I said, that the Thunder are going to be the best team in the NBA. And I believe that. I don't want to speak for you. I think they're going to be the best team in the NBA, better than the Celtics. And I think, we've seen Hartenstein have an early injury to his hand with a small fracture that's going to keep him out for a few weeks. I think health permitting, this team is going to run away with the NBA championship. And so I just really think that you're probably right in terms of just from an objective standpoint, for all the reasons you said. I feel like I was in between two other teams. One was the Milwaukee Bucks. I thought the Milwaukee Bucks moves have been underrated, and including by me, because I wasn't really thinking about them as much. I think you had mentioned the fact that some of the replacements that they've made in terms of like their starting lineup, adding Gary Trent Jr. in replacement of Malik Beasley is a big upgrade, and then Taurean Prince as well. DeLon Wright is a really serviceable backup, and they got all these guys for really cheap. So I think that their offseason has been incredible. I think they actually are going to be much better than they were last year. They could be just an underrated finals potential team in the East. I mean, we're all talking about the Knicks. We're talking about the Celtics. We're talking about who's the other team in the Sixers. The Bucks are not necessarily out of it. Giannis is still around his prime. I don't know if he's still in his peak of his powers, but he's around his prime, and they added a bunch of shooting. The Dame and Giannis pick and roll is still going to be unstoppable. I think that they have a really underrated offseason, and I think it could work out for them depending on the Gary Trent Jr. that they get. So that was definitely a potential answer to me. And then I just want to shout out one other team that I think is my actual answer, and I think it's like the biggest surprise answer. I think the Detroit Pistons have the most underrated offseason. I think the Pistons moved themselves well out of the top 3 lottery odds this year. And it's not going to surprise me if they're like decent. I think, okay, what are the moves? They lost Quentin Grimes. That's a bummer for them. He could have really helped, Cade a lot and develop there. Helped Cade and Ivy, but they resigned Cade. I think they definitely had to do that. I think he's getting better. He's only going to improve as the spacing around him improves, which it really has. They brought back Fontecchio. Looks like a legit good shooter, 41% on catch and shoot threes last year. They added Malik Beasley, who I just mentioned, on a very cheap deal, 42% on catch and shoot threes last year. So we're talking about a big, big, big improvement in spacing. Tobias Harris gets a lot of flack. He's a good player, an above average starter in the NBA. 37% on catch and shoot threes. He's solid. And he'll work really well at the 4 since somehow Detroit, I don't know what made them realize this, but they realized that Isaiah Stewart is not a 5. I don't know. I mean, it's not a 4. I don't know what gave it away. They figured it out. It's amazing, but he's going to move to his correct position and still also provide spacing at the 5 spot off the bench for a little more than, a little less than probably half the game. And, I wish the best for Asar Thompson, incredibly talented player, especially defensively. Definitely has a chance to be one of the best defensive players in the entire sport. I hope he, his health checks out. He checks all the health boxes and that he needs to get on the court. But as long as he's out, that also still improves the spacing as well as resolves some clunkiness. So I don't even know if it's a net loss necessarily for them to not have him. And then you add all this on top of what Jaden Ivey has looked like in the preseason. These guys all complement his skill set. They complement Cade's skill set. Ivey's been shooting the ball really well. I don't know. It won't blow me out of my shoes if the Pistons are fighting for like the 11-10 spot. Like, I won't be completely blown away by that. So I think because of those reasons, to me, no one's talking about the Pistons offseason, and I think it's pretty much underrated.
I think that the Pistons would be better off if they were worse. Obviously,
Probably.
and we both. This is how we view team building in a sense. I'm not saying they should tank, but I think it's pretty obvious that being the 15th seed is better than being the 11th seed. But with that being said, Detroit can still be bad this year. But to your point, they've given themselves an avenue to improvement. And more importantly, they've given their most important players a more functional environment to succeed in. The Pistons used very, very valuable draft picks on Cade Cunningham and Jaden Ivey. Jaden Ivey looked amazing this preseason. I don't know how much you watched him, XJ, but his shooting, if his shooting from the preseason holds up, this is an explosive athlete who can get to the rim. I'm not going to say as good as anybody, but he can get to the rim very, very well, excuse me. And all of a sudden he has space to operate in with these new pieces that you're talking about. That's huge.
Real quick, Geoff, 9 of 17 from 3 is Jaden Ivey this preseason, 12 of 14 from the free throw line.
Yeah, it just looks nice. He's doing it in rhythm. He's doing it off the catch. I'm not going to guarantee he's just this great shooter now, but he has the tools and he has the environment to succeed in now. So even if the Pistons aren't a playoff team this season, if Ivey and Cade make the types of leaps that I know they want in Detroit, that would make this season a success for them, even if it doesn't lead to wins right away.
Yeah, I agree. I think that they aren't going to have the best shot to have the number 1 pick, but we know how the lottery works. You know, a lot of times a team with the 5th best odds will still get the number 1 pick. So we'll see. But I do think that they're going to be a lot better. And I think it's in large part due to their offseason. Let's move to our second question because we have, 6 more to get through. Number 2, which team is most likely to disappoint this season? So which team is most likely to underperform expectations or be disappointing? I have a few teams in mind. One we kind of talked about over text to some extent, so I'm not sure if you chose them, but to me, one candidate would be the Denver Nuggets. A weird offseason for them. You lose KCP and Reggie Jackson and you bring in Westbrook. KCP, in my opinion, just clearly and markedly a better player than Westbrook and a better fit for the Nuggets. Reggie Jackson already did a lot of the Westbrook things besides play defense. Westbrook seems to have recommitted to the defensive end, so that'll be important. They did add Saric, who, I like for them, but overall there's a lot of question marks. Peyton Watson hasn't played yet in the preseason. There's a lot riding on Christian Brown to space, and he's been a low volume shooter who didn't shoot well during the preseason. Strother looks great in the preseason. Can he stay on the court defensively? I'm not sure. Is Aaron Gordon the backup 5 and play next to Saric or Deron Holmes? Like, do they actually play DeAndre Jordan, who I don't know. Like, he's aged how you would expect a big whose, effectiveness is based almost entirely on athleticism. So I think the Nuggets are a potential option. They're not the one that I'm going to pick. So I have another one, but I'm curious what you think about the Nuggets as a team that's potentially most likely to disappoint this season, and then whoever you actually picked.
Yeah, so I feel the opposite of you. Not the opposite, but I feel differently, I'd say, about the Nuggets. Look, Jokic is Jokic. I don't think a team can not be good when Jokic is on the court. I think it would have to be pretty extreme conditions, and I don't think those conditions exist right now. I think Jamal Murray is still a very good player. I think Michael Porter Jr. is still a good player. Aaron Gordon is a nice fit with a trio of Gordon, Porter Jr., Murray, Porter Jr., and Jokic. Nice fit is maybe an exaggeration, but if you were going to fit Aaron Gordon in at power forward, I don't know how much better you can do at point guard, small forward, and center than Jokic, Murray, and Porter Jr. I like that you gave Strother a shout out because if what he showed in preseason is at all legit, they lost this in KCP offensively. They lost a shooter. They lost that sort of supporting piece who doesn't need the ball in his hands, doesn't need to run pick and roll, can just shoot in space. So if Strother can provide any semblance of offensive impact that sees him playing off of Jokic, that they need to replace KCP in that way. I don't think Christian Braun is Braun or Brown.
It's Brown. It's Brown. We've talked
Christian
about
Brown.
this. By the way, real quick, Strother did this last preseason. Like, this is not last preseason. He shot like 45% from three on a bunch of attempts. So this is the same. The reason he can't stay on the court is defensively. So he can provide the KCP spacing. I'm very confident about that. He can't provide it in the same package with the defense, and that's the issue for him.
Yeah, that's totally reasonable. He's 22, and Mike Malone's a good defensive coach, so let's see what he can do there. But I of course KCP is going to be tough to replace. I just think that the Nuggets were closer last season than everybody's talking about. And I brought this up earlier. You know, they won the championship in 2023, and they lose this tough 7-game series against Minnesota. And I feel like they're being written off a little bit. And I don't know. I guess I'm maybe honing in too much on the word disappoint, but I don't know how high the expectations are right now with them to begin with.
To me, I was relative to expectations. I think people see the Nuggets still as like a title favorite. Do you not think that's the case? Maybe I'm off on the read.
I think they've been moved. I think they've been moved a tier below. I think they're closer to like Philly, or I don't think the consensus has them in the same tier as, definitely not as OKC or Boston, but maybe not even the Knicks.
Really? You think the Knicks have a better, or people think the Knicks have a better chance at the title than Nuggets?
Yeah, I think that's
okay.
I think that's where we're headed right now. The Knicks betting odds are higher. They've been bet ahead of Denver. So, look, I think they're right there still in the title. In the title picture. I think they always will be, as long as Jokic is this good and he has nice supporting pieces. I just think the point that you're trying to make here is that the margins are as thin as they've ever been. And I think that's true. I don't think they can handle Jamal Murray deciding not to be good at basketball for a month, or not playing basketball for a couple of months. I think that he needs to have a bounce back season where he earns the money he's being paid. But I think they still do have the pieces in place to be a contender. My choice is a team I talked about a little bit earlier, and it's probably going to piss some people off. I want to focus on the word disappointment here, people, because this is not a team that I think is going to be bad. I think this is going to be a playoff team. I think this is a team that can make the finals. Again, wink, wink. My choice is the Dallas Mavericks. And this might be kind of a cop-out again, but this is a team that made the finals last season. And when a team overachieves like the Mavericks did last season, there is a propensity to keep expectations at that level. And I'll give an example that'll ring true to some people who we know in Knicks-verse. The Knicks made the playoffs in 2021 after starting the season with the lowest win total over-under. They hired Tom Thibodeau. Julius Randle became an all-NBA level all-star player. And they doubled their win expectation. But what people didn't understand is they got a lot of outlier performances that season that were going to be hard to sustain. And what happened was the Knicks went into that offseason, actually got better, actually upgraded from some of their weaknesses. And Knicks fans were like, holy shit, this was a team that won at like a 45-47 win pace across an 82-game season out of nowhere. And now they got better. This team's going to win 50 games. And they actually just got worse. And this is something that happens quite often, is people don't consider that the season before was more of a positive outlier, and they assume those things are going to hold strong. I think what's happening with the Mavericks here is they're assuming that a lot of the things that they got on their path to the finals are going to hold true, And they're going to marry those with the upgrades that they made in Najee Marshall, which I think is an upgrade on the wing. Quentin Grimes, Klay Thompson, these are good players they added. I think the Mavericks are going to be good. I think the Mavericks actually have a better team from start to bottom than they did last year. But as we talk about so often on this show, Quentin Grimes and Najee Marshall and Klay Thompson aren't replacing Derrick Jones Jr. and Josh Green in a vacuum. They're replacing the Derrick Jones Jr. and Josh Green that went on this heater in the playoffs. And if they don't replace that output, it's going to look like they're worse. And so I think we could get to the end of the season and Mavericks fans will be pointing fingers at guys like Klay Thompson. Oh, Klay Thompson doesn't have it anymore. Pointing fingers, maybe even a guy like Quentin Grimes if he only shoots 37% from three. Oh, I thought this was a sniper. He doesn't do anything. But when the truth is they weren't accounting for the positive variance they experienced last season.
Yeah, I agree with most of that. Like, I think that that's definitely the case. I think they're definitely like better. And it's hard to say, like, what do you mean by better? I think that they have better and more cohesive talent that if you simulated the season 10,000 times, they'd be better this season than they were last year, basically. That's what I mean by better. And I think that's how you mean it as well. So we agree on that. I just think, like, I don't expect things not to work out for them, but I could see it not working out for them. So I guess I'm not expecting to be disappointed. I think they have, I think we are going to see improvement from Quentin Grimes. Like, I think that he's going to kind of revert back to where he played, as a Knick, where it was like, this guy is one of the best on-ball defenders in the league at the two, and then also being able to hit at a 38, 39% clip from three, a sniper from the corners. I think we'll see some of that. I think we'll see improvement from Derek Lively. Apparently Derek Lively is like an MVP candidate. I didn't realize that the Derek Lively buzz on social media was like, you mentioned Derek Lively and everybody comes out of the woodwork like, yo, this guy's a superstar. Like, he's the next guy. I did not recognize that. Like, I realized that when people compared him to Isaiah Hartenstein, I said, this is insane. And everybody was like, what are you talking about? Derek Lively, the next guy. Like, I did not realize that, but he's good and he will be good and he will probably get better. And they just have a really good mix of talent, guys who can play up, who can play down, in terms of, like you mentioned, Najee Marshall. If Maxi Kleber is healthy, he gives you a weapon at the five for a lot of minutes. He can still stretch the floor. So I think they have a really, really good and well-rounded team. And so I could see them being worse, but I don't expect them to disappoint, I guess, unless a disappointment would be not winning the Western Conference Finals. Like, I don't, if that would be a disappointment, then yeah, but I think they'll be really, really good and right in the thick of it going into the playoffs.
Yeah, the West is just so deep. They could not win a playoff series. They could be better than last year and not win a playoff series. I guess that's where I land on with the disappointment. And I think this is more just about a macro attitude towards how we view team evaluations from year to year. You can't just assume the good from the last year, ignore the maybe outlier and maybe bad, and then also just assume natural progression. Like, this is how I view Mavericks fans and maybe even some objective people prognosticating for them. They were like, oh, there's this finals team that still has Luka, still has Kyrie in his prime, and now they have young guys like Quentin Grimes and Derek Lively who are going to get better. And they replaced Derrick Jones Jr. and Josh Green, who in a vacuum weren't great, with better players, objectively better players in Najee Marshall and Klay Thompson. I think that's the expectation around this team. And it just doesn't work like that. I'm not saying it can't work like that. They can hit their highest percentile ceiling again, and they can make the finals again. Any team with Luka, I'm now convinced, he's that good. But I do think that the way the Mavericks are talked about, and if you look at even betting odds, like they're the seventh favorite in the NBA right now. The tiers they're put in, the expectations placed on them, they're expected to win 1-2 playoff series. And I think that Mavericks fans, if they lost a second round series, will view this season as a disappointment relative to last season. And I just think that's kind of a likely outcome.
Yeah, I could see that. I think it really depends on who they play. Like, I definitely expect them to win. I think it's disappointing if they lose in the first round, regardless. Like, I absolutely think that would be a disappointment. So I think it depends on who they play in the second round. But what's actually going to happen, I just checked the script while you were talking. What's going to happen is they're going to beat OKC in the second round on great shooting luck again, again in the exact same way they won last year. And people are going to come back to this pod and say, what are these guys talking about? It happened again. There's no way that can happen twice. It'll happen for a second time. So let's move to question number 3. Question number 3. Which team will have the best defense this year? There's a few good candidates here. I think my choice, I'm going to go with Orlando narrowly over OKC. You mentioned OKC, and we can talk about them as well. But I want to say first thing in evaluating the success of a defense, like I'm always going to look at kind of like shooting luck. So both teams did experience some shooting luck last season. They were both top 4 defenses in the NBA, but they didn't experience as much shooting luck as like the Pelicans or even the best defensive team, which was the Timberwolves. And Orlando this year, I think, just has basically no weaknesses defensively in terms of guys who are going to play real minutes. Like we're talking about, their rotation includes Jonathan Isaac, Franz Wagner, Suggs, KCP, Paolo, Wendell Carter, Goga Batadze, Anthony Black, who I think is going to play more minutes. Like the only holes they have are Cole Anthony, basically, who I think is kind of getting phased out a little bit. He played his fewest minutes per game of his career last year. If Anthony Black starts shooting threes with more volume, I think he's taking minutes from Cole Anthony and Gary Harris too. So to me, I just think they have everything: rim protection, switchability, versatility, size, athleticism, and even maybe most importantly, the team's identity is already tied up to their defense. Like they believe in themselves as a defensive lockdown team. And so that mentality is always going to be there every possession on the defensive end. So they're going to have consistency day in and day out. To me, I think that just sets them up to be the best defense in the league with the talent that they have, the mentality, the coach that they have, who's really focused on defense, and they know that's how they're going to win games. So I just think they're going to be elite, and I think they can do some of what we saw from Minnesota last year in terms of the success defensively, the defensive rating, and I don't think they need shooting luck to be able to do it.
Yeah, Orlando is going to be unbelievable defensively. Just looking at defensive EPM, they had 5 different players in their rotation last year in the 90th percentile or better, including Jonathan Isaac, who led the NBA in defensive EPM, I think, or tied with Isaiah Hartenstein. Franz, Suggs, and Isaac is an extremely... So here's the thing about defensive players that a lot of people don't understand. Being a really, really good defender usually correlates with not being good on offense. It's very rare to be a super elite defender and be passable on offense. Passable enough on offense that you don't need to be mitigated in other ways. To have 3 guys in Wagner, Suggs, and Isaac, who not only are elite defenders, but can play a lot because they're not huge negatives on offense because all can shoot to some varying degrees, that's almost unheard of. That's extremely rare. You only see that from mega elite teams. And more specifically, you only see that from really, really elite defenses because obviously the best defenses are able to have their best defenders on the floor. The Magic are going to be able to play, assuming health, all of their best defenders a lot of minutes because they're playable offensively. Paolo Banchero is actually an underrated defender, which I'm sure anybody listening to this podcast is going to roll their eyes at. Oh, you guys think Paolo is underrated now? I mean, yeah, he's a different conversation, but he's a fine defender who actually provides rim protection when they go small. That's huge for them. It allows them to up their lineup versatility, and they can go with one of our favorite lineups. We haven't seen it much yet, but Suggs, KCP, Franz, Paolo, Isaac. That lineup is just going to that's going to be like a new death lineup almost that has no weaknesses, especially if Paolo and Franz make the type of leaps that are being assumed. You want Franz's shooting to see some positive regression, but Paolo clearly has the pedigree in terms of his size and his dexterity and his skill. So if he can make, the type of initiation leap that people are projecting for him, that lineup is going to be the one that helps propel it forward because it sees him in the most space to operate. This defense is going to be incredible. I have potential other options. I think Minnesota is just an option again because they were elite last season, and yeah, Randall's not a good defender, but Towns isn't a good defender either, especially at power forward. The metrics didn't love him at power forward, both the individual metrics and the on-off metrics. They were a much better defense when he didn't play. Randall brings some positives to the table at the power forward position specifically. He's good when put on an island. I don't know how the Randall at 5 minutes are going to go or how prevalent they're going to be, but Finch pulled them out in the preseason a little bit. That could hurt their overall net, just because if you're playing Randall at the 5, it's to unlock offense, not to be an elite defense. But I think Minnesota on the whole will still be a very good defense. They still have McDaniels. Edwards is still a good defender. Gobert won Defensive Player of the Year last season. Nickeil Alexander-Walker will be in the rotation. Good defender there. Mike Conley, he's old, but he's just one of those guys that be in the right place at the right time. He's a fine defender. So I expect Minnesota to be near the top of the league. And just one more team before I pass it back to you is we just have to say Boston. I feel like you can say Boston to every answer, but even missing Porzingis at the start of the season, they've got White and Drew Holiday at the point of attack. Tatum and Brown are good defenders. They're a smart team. They're going to be near the top of the league too.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I think Minnesota's going to take a step back. And not really just because of Randall, but I just think that they did have more shooting luck than the rest of these teams that we're talking about in terms of 3-point percentage on wide open threes, the volume of wide open threes, and teams just missing against them. So I think that we'll see a little bit of regression there. The other team that I just wanted to flag, I think is really important. You talked about them earlier, Oklahoma City. The last year they were the 4th ranked defense. And like you said, they went from in their rotation, Jalen Williams, who is a useful, but like undersized big, who's not a great rim protector, and Josh Giddey. They went from those two guys to Isaiah Hartenstein, one of the elite defensive players in the entire league at the 5 last year. You just mentioned he led or was second in the league in EPM, defensive EPM. They go from those guys to Hartenstein, and then Alex Caruso, who I've said for the past 5 years is the premier point of attack defender in the league. Guess who one of the other main candidates for that title is? His teammate, Lou Dort, who I looked this up, of the last 10 years, among the best seasons by B-Ball Index's its metric perimeter isolation defense, the top 7 of the top 25 belong to Dort and Caruso. 7 of the top 25 seasons of the last 10 years belong to two guys who are now on the same team in terms of perimeter isolation defense. If you put them both out there, what penetration is happening? Like, you can absolutely shut down a team that thrives off of guard penetration if you put those two out there at the same time. And guess what? They're also not going to hurt you offensively because they can space. So this team is constructed perfectly. Like, again, they were already a top 4 defense. I think it's like nonsensical, to be honest. Like, I was thinking about this and I'm like, can I really say Orlando's going to be a better defense than this defense, given what the upgrades that they did? Not only did they have 2 below average defenders and then made upgrades on those, but they upgraded potentially in the maximum possible way you could have upgraded across the entire league, aside from bringing in Victor Wembanyama or something. Like, they have to be better defensively, like unless, again, they experience a ton of negative shooting luck. But yeah, okay, not only do you have the Hartenstein injury with the fractured hand, he's going to miss at least maybe the first month or a little bit more than that, but I think they'll still be awesome without him, and only get better as he gets better and he gets locked in. So I think they definitely have a chance to be the best defensive team in the league as well. Among the 4 teams that we mentioned, I think it has to be one of those.
Yeah, it could just be the best defense in the NBA. I still think Orlando will be slightly better because I think more of their emphasis has to be on defense. I don't think their offense will be as good. So I just think that's natural. Like, you can't just give 100% all 48 minutes on both sides of the ball. That's not how it works. But to sort of play devil's advocate with myself, part of the reason this works, we talk about big threes all the time as NBA fans. The Celtics started in 2008, and then the Heat formed in early 2010s, and so on and so on. We talk about big threes. I don't know if we've ever seen a big three like OKC's Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Jalen Williams, and Chet Holmgren. All three were in the 93rd percentile or above in defensive EPM. All three are very, very like good defenders, obviously. This opens things up in so many ways for their role players. When you're building a team around guys like this, around two-way players who defend the way they do, all of a sudden you don't have to have, usually role players are more defense than offense, of course, shooting, but when you think about a role player, it's, oh, well, my star is a guy like Donovan Mitchell, who's also a fine defender, but I'm just he's the first person that popped in my head. Oh, I have James Harden as my go-to guy. We need defense around him because James Harden's going to carry the offense. That's usually how it works. With Shea, Jalen, and Chet, you don't need that. You can fill in around them however you want. Whatever good players you can find, this has allowed OKC to have the depth they have because it doesn't matter what players you put next to those guys. They're going to be good as long as they're doing it in an additive way. Aaron Wiggins shot almost 50% from three last year. He gets to be the best version of himself. Cason Wallace is a rookie that wasn't necessarily ready to contribute offensively a ton, even though he had a good shooting season too, I believe. But he was ready to be.
He shot 42% from three.
Yeah. But he was ready to deliver defensively from day one. Put him in next to those guys, and he's going to do it. The list goes on, and they're flexible because Chet Holmgren can play power forward, he can play center. So any position, any type of player that OKC wants, they can plug in next to these guys. Compare that to other, collections of very good players in the past. They had to specifically target role players or else it wouldn't work. OKC doesn't have that problem, and I think that raises their ceiling even higher.
Yeah, I agree with all that. And just one last note, just using defensive EPM, obviously it's not a perfect metric. It's probably not even the best defensive metric. Probably defensive LeBron is a little better. But using defensive EPM, we're talking about SGA, 97th percentile of defensive EPM. Jalen Williams, J-Dub, 94th percentile in defensive EPM. Chet Holmgren, 93rd percentile in defensive EPM. Isaiah Hartenstein, 99th percentile in defensive EPM. Alex Caruso, 99th percentile in defensive EPM. And, maybe the worst guy of all of them, I guess, Lou Dort, 82nd percentile in defensive EPM. This is outrageous in terms of the defensive weapons that they put together and the level that these guys can get to. Like you said, that you can't focus 100% of your time, your efforts on defense and offense, but the levels that these guys can get to in a really important possession, they can absolutely shut down any team in the NBA. And that goes for the Boston Celtics as well. So, yeah.
I don't want to jump to the end, but the Celtics Thunder games with Porzingis healthy will be some of the highest quality basketball the league has seen in quite some time. That will be two teams with no weaknesses. When you have White, Holiday, Brown, Tatum, Porzingis matching up against Shea, Caruso, Jalen Williams, Chet Holmgren, I don't feel as restricted with OKC to name five guys because they have a number of units, but they have a number of lineups to match that five-some of Boston, which is a perfect five-some. Boston is still the standard, people. We said it before last season. This is the season 2 premiere. On the pilot episode of Hot Hand Theory, we said that Boston starting five would be one of the best fives we've ever seen because it is perfect synergistically. Jason Tatum's job is easier. People always talk bad as if that's bad for Jason Tatum. Oh, well, he gets to operate in the most space possible. Fuck yeah, he does. He absolutely does. And he capitalizes on it. And that's why he was in the top 10 in EPM, and he was great. And he's going to get better. He's still only 26 years old. Jason Tatum's about to get better and be in this environment that is great to operate in. When Boston and OKC play each other, that's going to be magical basketball, and I for one cannot wait to watch those two games in this regular season and potentially 4 to 7 of them in the finals if they meet.
So good. It's going to be incredible. It's so good. And I just want to say, again, I just want to reiterate, for me, the new standard is the Oklahoma City Thunder. I think, it's crazy because I'm gonna leave out Isaiah Hartenstein. You start SGA, Dort, Caruso, J-Dub, and Holmgren. That is the standard. There's nobody better than them. They're better than the Boston Five. They're better than everybody. And that's I'm gonna die on that hill, and we'll see how it plays out. But I have the script, so I feel pretty confident about it. Let's go to question 4. Which team has the highest ceiling but also the lowest floor? Geoff, this is an interesting question. How did you interpret this question, and what do you think will be the answer?
So I interpreted it as which team has the most volatility. Like, which is the highest variance team going into the season? I think it's a pretty simple answer, to be honest. I think there's a team that can win a championship, and that same team has its 2 best players, or 2 of its 3 best players are huge injury risks, and if they get injured, this team is fucked, and that's the Philadelphia 76ers. Look, we just talked about synergy. Maxey, George, and Embiid is as synergistic as 3 stars can get. Like, I was just seeing the praises of OKC's big 3. The Philadelphia big 3 is better if they're healthy and they're still their best version of themselves. Maxey, George, and Embiid is probably the best trio of players in the NBA. I'm not sure it's close. Whatever, it's probably close, but this is number 1, I think, and I mean that demonstrably. George has proven across 3 different paradigms that he is the perfect supporting piece. 2019 in OKC, he was second in MVP voting, or third in MVP voting, as a number 2 option. You had a wonderful monologue this past offseason on our show with DJ where you talked about Larry Markkinen and you talked about support. What was the phrase you used? You called them like role play. You didn't want to call them role players. It was like non-scoring stars or something. Or
yeah, I don't remember the term I
used. Whatever. You talked about Larry Markkinen. Paul George is Larry Markkinen with a little bit more of a creation bag and a way better defender. He can play off Maxey. He can play off Embiid. He's going to make those 2 guys better. Maxey, we did an episode earlier this offseason. I expect him to improve at a rate of nobody else in the league. I think he's going to be great. I think he's ready to break through. Everyone knows what Embiid can do. Some people are worried about him not playing back-to-backs. I found that report promising. I think that's very good for Philadelphia. I think that twofold for Philadelphia. 1, it gives Embiid the best chance possible to be his best self in the playoffs, to not be tired, to not be hurt. This is their best chance of getting to the playoffs with him healthy. That's all that matters right now. Nothing else matters to Philadelphia except getting Embiid healthy to the playoffs. 2, it actually gives Maxey and George a runway to developing skills outside of Embiid, to being better creators and initiators with the ball in their hands. Their roles are going to expand when Embiid's not playing. It gets them in more of a rhythm. In a weird way, as long as George is healthy, I think Philadelphia has set themselves up to be the best version of themselves when the playoffs roll around. But regardless of what they do, these strategies exist for a reason. Embiid and George are injury-prone players. We've seen it time and time again. I think Philadelphia can win a championship. I think this big 3 is elite, but I think they could just disappear in the playoffs because of these injuries too. So I think Philadelphia is the answer.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think Philly's the answer. Like, I think it's the right option, so to speak. I do think most of the really strong teams, that are expected to make the playoffs have a very, very safe floor for the most part, barring injury. So with Philly, their floor drops dramatically with injury risk, but obviously so do most teams. And, the fact is just that Philly has the highest injury risk of probably any team out there that is expected to contend for a title. So I think you're right. I would agree with you. And for all the reasons that you said, for me, I'm going to go with the team that I think has the widest spread, even fully healthy. Like, if they were fully healthy, I still think they have the biggest difference between their ceiling and their floor. And to me, that's the Sacramento Kings. I think this DeRozan thing can go a lot of ways. Like, from the preseason, he's not taking any more threes than he normally does. Doesn't seem to be a point of emphasis for him. Seems like he's just going to play his game, which is fine. The Kings offense is really dynamic, and we just kind of expect them to figure it out. You have so much talent. You have, Fox, obviously, Sabonis, DeRozan. Then you have great supporting players, Keegan Murray and Ellis, even McLaughlin and Trey Lyles, if when he comes back, could be two valuable players for them. But I think that, I don't know, I think they're noticing their own issues with their like dearth of shooting. We see them go out and sign Doug McDermott, who is purely a one-way player. I also think he's absolutely one of the best pure shooters in the entire game. Like, underrated how good a shooter Doug McDermott is. Actually, do you want to hear an interesting Doug McDermott stat that I looked up?
Always, actually.
Okay, great. I'm not sure if people realize this. Since 2020, Doug McDermott is shooting 41% on catch and shoot threes on 1,136 attempts and 43% on pull-up threes on 222 attempts. This guy, like, on volume across the last 4 years, has been like one of the best shooters in the entire NBA. He just can't play enough because he's horrible defensively. He can't stay on the court, but definitely one of the best shooters in the league who's never spoken about. Almost like a Steve Novak kind of situation where if the guy's on the court, he's going to snipe, but he can't stay on the court. So you go out and sign a guy like that. To me, that indicates like we're really concerned about the spacing situation. And I think they should be. I think they needed shooting help. I think there's a ton of pressure on Keegan Murray. I think there's a ton of pressure on Keon Ellis to be elite spacers. And I think we think of like Keegan Murray as this ridiculous shooter because of his insane rookie season. But let's not forget, he shot slightly below league average from three last season. No, I don't think many people recognize that. And while Keon Ellis, I just believe, is a very good shooter, he's been consistent through college and in the NBA, and his free throw shooting is good. He's going to have to play like 30 plus minutes per game and be this elite 3-and-D guard who, locks down the other team's best guard and then also shoots threes at a really high 40% plus clip. I don't know. That is necessary for this to work at a really high level, in my opinion. I think he can do it, but who knows? And then is Fox's shooting bump that we saw from him, is that legit? Like, there's so many questions. If it all clicks, Murray takes a little leap. He maintains his defense. He improves his shooting. Fox maintains his shooting. We don't get a DeMar DeRozan drop-off at age 35. Sabonis actually starts letting it fly more. We've seen his shooting volume. Unlike DeRozan, his shooting volume did increase in the preseason. He's trying to shoot more threes. Wasn't very successful with it, but he's trying. They could be awesome. If any one of those things don't pan out or two of those things don't pan out, is it crazy for this team to be like a low play-in team, like in the Western Conference? I don't think it's crazy at all. So I could see a huge spread for the Sacramento Kings. I think they could be pretty bad, like fighting for a 10 seed, or they can be really good in the thick of it, competing to win a first round series and being in contention to win a second round series in the playoffs. So I to me, like in terms of fully healthy, they're the team that has the biggest spread.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I love that you added the caveat of just healthy. Like, there's no variance here with the injuries. This is just like, what is this team going to be? I was going to joke about Sabonis letting it launch because every offseason they talk about how his coach wants him to start shooting more threes and he just never does. It seems like he shoots fewer every year.
Yeah.
It seemed like DeRozan tried to uptick his 3-point rate in the preseason. That's another thing that seems to happen every year. Like,
I don't think, just real quick, I don't think he did. Like, I think he was shooting 2 per 36 minutes or something, which is like his average the last 4 years.
Really?
Yeah.
Maybe I just saw him shoot a 3 once and was like, whoa.
Yeah. He took 7 attempts from 3 this preseason.
You hate to see it. I think the Fox shooting is real. You commented on that. I think he's a fine enough free throw shooter, mid-70s for his career. He's been good from the mid-range mostly. He's been in, I think, like the 75th percentile or above almost every year the last 5 years, I think. I think he's a good shooter. I actually think there's a lot of pressure on him to create offense. Basically, the only other thing they have is Sabonis standing at the top of the key and finding cutters or dribbling into handoffs. This puts a lot of pressure on Fox, and I think it'd be nice for him if it was a little easier at times, but he's a really good player. So wouldn't surprise me if he's just, honestly, if he's an all-star this year outside the all-NBA conversation. Like, I think that based on team success, these are not unattainable heights for him. I think the Kings are probably going to be closer to the plan than a solid playoff team. I think they're going to be fun to watch. They always are. I just, at the end of the day, the DeRozan fit, that's tough, man, because you got, like we just talked about with Sabonis, he's not going to shoot many threes. Maybe he'll do so at the start of the season. Maybe he'll run hot. That'd be good for them. But I think the most likely outcome is he's just the all-star level player he's been and the type he and profiles as that player. And then you have DeRozan, who likes to operate inside the arc. Fox, I just mentioned his shooting. Yeah, he shot fine from three last season, but he prefers to get to the rim and to operate from the mid-range. I think it's going to be clunky, and we're not even talking about the defensive side of the ball, where basically Murray and Ellis have to carry the defense. That's what they do. You replace Harrison Barnes with DeRozan. Yes, that's an offensive upgrade probably, even though Barnes can shoot threes and DeRozan doesn't seem to. But DeRozan's still a better overall offensive player. But you do get worse defensively. DeRozan's not a good defender, really has never been. So I think it could be clunky on both ends. I don't love it long term either. I don't know what they're building towards. I don't know what the end goal is here. It's kind of not surprising to hear them in Brandon Ingram conversations. And I mean that
Let's put DeRozan and Brandon Ingram together.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying though. I don't think there's like a vision, or I don't think they don't really seem to value the things that we talk about on here, like synergy and spacing and stuff. They just seem to want to throw good players together and hope it works out. So it doesn't really surprise me that Ingram is in the mix too. I do agree with your pick for this team though, because while I might be lower on them and their regular season output, I do like these players individually. And I'm not arrogant enough to think that, oh, my view on synergy is just all or nothing. It's always 100% going to be right. The Kings could just find some magic and, some things could go the way that I don't see them. I do agree there's a world where they're fighting for home court advantage again. I mean, they were the 4 seed 2 seasons ago, and when they lost to Golden State in that Game 7 when Steph Curry dropped 50 points. So it's not insane to think that they could just be right around that again.
Yeah, I agree, and they were also the best offense of all time to that point. And I actually feel surprised at the direction that they went with DeRozan, because I did think they cared about synergy and spacing, and they were doing really creative things with the heavy DHO action with Sabonis. But I think this DeRozan move feels like a switch, like a change, and so that I think that's the reason why people expect them to be really good, because well, you just added DeMar DeRozan, who is an awesome player, and I totally agree that he's an awesome player, but don't think he's a great fit there. So we'll see